What is going on? Welcome to today's episode of Conquer the Day. Today, we have the pleasure to interview one of our dear friends, Vanessa Gillette, now known as Vanessa Pozos. She just got married last year and just changed her name this week. We got to go by her new name. She is the owner of Vanessa G Fitness and Nutrition, a coaching company that helps women reset their metabolism and restore hormone balance. Vanessa has shared her entire health journey on social media very openly. And she went through a weight loss phase, which really kickstarted her whole process with coaching. Originally, she was working in a corporate position and just started coaching more as a side hustle, but she was quickly overwhelmed with the speed that her business grew because before she knew it, she was pretty much a solopreneur running a multiple six-figure business basically by herself. So she kind of went into a tunnel and spent a year under immense stress, just really growing the business and trying to wear all of the hats. And she went into what she calls more of a system wide shutdown with regard to how her body responded to that stress. In today's podcast, we really want to talk with Vanessa about her experience firsthand so that she can talk about what actually happens if you do not manage your stress. What happens to your body? What happens to your mind, your ability to function? And how can you go through the process of restoring your health if you have already reached that point? So she's going to share her whole story. And again, to help you hopefully see that stress is something that isn't just intangible. It will show up in your body if you ignore it, but it is very avoidable to get to that point of system wide shutdown. So, with that wide intro, Vanessa, thank you so much for coming to the show and being willing to just dish it all out and share your story with us. We're excited.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited and honored to be able to be a guest on your podcast. I know I've watched what you guys have done for a while, and I've been fortunate enough to become friends with you guys over the last few years, and it's been really incredible to watch your growth. So I'm honored to be a small part of that year being on the podcast today.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we're grateful to have you. And I think that to get started, it's kind of setting the stage of really knowing where you were at the beginning of this process of restoring your health. And so, what did a typical day when you were in your peak of work look like? And what do you think those major stressors were? Either the things you were thinking about or things you were actually having to deal with, or even some of the health activities, whether that was what you're putting your body under or anything of the like.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as Lindsay was talking about there, I did go through that period of just immense growth in my business, which quickly turned into growing out a team and really diving deep into just this whole new area of running a business with multiple full-time team members and having all these people relying on me. That really just pressured me into I need to step up. I need to step up and become the leader that I didn't know I was capable of being. And so with that, I dove probably a little bit too deep into what I could now retroactively consider hustle culture, to where I, had just consumed myself with all of this type of content around how to be an incredible entrepreneur and how to really, push yourself to like really grow an amazing business. And just my personality as a whole, I've always been drawn to the type of stuff that's just push harder, do more, go, 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 because that's just throughout my whole life. I've had themes of that. I love to push myself. I like to work hard. It's something I really pride in myself of I'm a hard worker. It's how I identify. And so when that translated over to growing this business, it was like, okay, if, working a normal kind of work schedule is good, then working like twice that much is better, right? Just the more you can do, the more you can get done, the faster you're going to grow, and the faster you grow, like these are good things. That's what I thought to myself. So circling back to really answering your question there, Brian, my schedule during those days was very much a wake up at 5 a.m. and then I would do an hour split between 20 minutes of reading, 20 minutes of journaling / looking at my schedule and kind of really intensely planning out my day. Like I was really time blocking things out very specifically. And then I did 20 minutes of meditation. And so during that hour, I felt like these were all really great things. And these are all things I still stand by that I do in different ways. But that was the first hour of my day every single day. I always started my day with, in that first 20 minutes when I was reading, I would always start with my first cup of coffee at that time. So 5 a.m. on an empty stomach, drinking a cup of coffee. And then come, about 6 o'clock, that's when I would start diving into work, because I prided myself in already having a good bit of work done by the time, most people in my time zone were kind of jumping into their work schedules. That was something that gave me relief. It made me feel better about myself. It made me feel like I was ahead. So that's something I did. And essentially from there, what my day would look like was just work as much as I could for as long as I could until I couldn't do it anymore and I would need a break. And then it would be like, okay, now it's time for a meal, or my break might look like going to the gym and getting in a hard workout. Like I said, I like to push myself. I was also at this time training, typically on like a 4-day training program, and I was trying to put on some muscle during this period. So I was pushing myself pretty hard, doing a lot of volume. And then, I would maybe take a break again for another meal. And then again, just work as long as I could, typically into the evening, and then just be done and go to bed. And that was pretty much my Monday through Friday, most days of the week. And that's what, we can talk about later, of like, that really did put me into a hole.
Yeah. And at that time, were you trying to take, because from the outside looking in, it's like, okay, that sounds reasonable for the achiever, because you take Saturdays and Sundays off. Were you working Saturdays and Sundays as well, or were you trying to kind of take those off and relax?
It was not an intentional working on Saturdays and Sundays. It kind of depended. And so during that initial period, there was a transition time where initially this was when my husband, Omar, he wasn't fully in the business yet. So he had his own other full-time job, but he also helped with the business outside of that. So typically it might look like for him on Saturdays, he was doing work in the business, which, just both of us being kind of high achievers, it might be like if one of us is working, the other probably just wants to work too, because it's something we enjoy doing together. So I didn't typically have plans to work on the weekends, and it wasn't every weekend, but a lot of weekends I was typically working on at least a little bit on Saturday and Sunday too.
I want to kind of lean into that a little bit too. So if you hear the schedule though, it's like, does she have kids? It's like, it's not that big of a deal because it's typical like timeline, right? And so I want to lean into this. What underneath the surface was causing the stress too? Right. So like if you think of the time, like, okay, well, she's drinking more caffeine, that obviously cortisol response. You're pushing your body really hard when you had all this stress. It's like, oh, someone might think, oh, well, do I need to just not work out? It's like, no. What was happening internally that you feel like was also exacerbating the stress, or how were you internalizing the stress that made some of the health complications worse?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you asked that question, because it's so important to like distinguish those things. And I have to talk about that a lot with, my audience and my clients, of distinguishing of like, okay, because I'm talking about this, this schedule per se of what I was doing that ultimately, dug me into a hole in terms of my cortisol. But it wasn't necessarily that any one thing about that schedule or the schedule itself is inherently bad. It was more so of how I was going about it, to where my thoughts, the way I was thinking about my workload, about life, about everything I was doing, impacted how I would feel. And so, like, a lot of times we're talking about these like physiological reactions, like our cortisol, that's a physiological response. But your thoughts are going to impact that physiological response. So I could be somebody who maybe doesn't have a schedule like that at all. Maybe I do absolutely nothing all day long, but maybe I'm really just mentally, I'm having a lot of thoughts that are essentially what we would consider to be stress. Like, it's thinking about, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. I don't have any time to do it, or I'm not motivated, or I don't like how I feel in my body. Like, whatever the thoughts are for you, you're having these thoughts that create this feeling of stress that can be having that same cortisol reaction, that same response, to where you can end up with the same result. Whereas somebody else, and I honestly, I think a lot of you too, of the things that you guys have done, you really push yourselves, like the ultra marathons, like these things are really incredible and they're really inspiring. For a lot of people, if they try to just repeat exactly what you're doing and they aren't mentally tough enough to where they can, manage their own thoughts around these things and manage maybe other stressors in their lives at the same time, that could send them down a rabbit hole of their cortisol tanking and, ending up with the result that I had. Whereas, no, it's really, it's not like any one thing that you do or I do or anybody does is going to create a certain physiological response. It's a lot of it does come back to the way we think about it. And during that time period, I was not managing my mind. I was, gung ho and I got to work hard. I got to do all this. But there was also thoughts that I wasn't even aware of. There probably were subconscious of me thinking of like, I'm really stressed and like this is too much and I don't have time for anything. And I'm, sad that I don't have friendships because I'm working all the time and I feel distant from my family and all these other things that I just wasn't even acknowledging. Like they weren't even conscious thoughts at the time, but I would just push them down. And so it's eventually when I, maybe it's something bad happens in the business, because we all know there's always ups and downs in business. And then all it takes is that one down day. And now everything seems to like break. And that's really ultimately what did happen to me. Was I remember a specific time where we had a challenge with a client. And, it's one of those times where there's always going to be, you want to have every happy customer, but the reality is there's always going to be that 1% that you can't make happy. And I'm the type of person, I want to make everybody happy. And I could get very stressed very easily if I had an unhappy customer. And when I had this customer that, sent me an email that was very unhappy, and I was, got on a call with her, and I was really trying to manage the situation. And I remember that week was when I really started having my first kind of physiological symptoms of things going wrong. And at the time I didn't know it, but looking back, I do think that that might have been a little bit of a catalyst that pushed things over the edge for me.
Yeah, that's a really great place to go. And I think this is such an important conversation. I'm so glad we're having it because it really is. Stress is not just physical, it's psychological, it's emotional. There are so many different aspects of stress that are different for each person, but at the same time, a lot of us experience experience it similarly. What were the warning signs, or maybe some of the yellow flags? It sounds like you were just describing a yellow one or maybe a red flag, but what were some of the things that your body started to talk to you with, saying like, hey, this is not good? What were those things that initially started coming up when you recognized them?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I noticed, even prior to actually the incident that I was talking about there, where it was like I really started to notice things, but even prior to that, I was starting to notice that month over month, I was just like gaining a little bit of body fat, to where I was like, I didn't notice anything was happening until, probably like 3 or 4 months later. I was looking back at photos of myself from 3 or 4 months prior, and I was like, I look a lot softer. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense, because I'm still eating the same way. I'm still training the same way. Actually, I'm probably training harder, because right now I'm trying to, really actually improve my physique a little bit here. And yet I don't like the way I'm looking right now. That's strange. And I just kind of like mentally noted it, but didn't really place a lot of attention to it, I guess. And then a few months later, I noticed, okay, it's showing up on the scale. I have gained some weight here. Something is going on. This doesn't make any sense. And so then when I tried to actually go back into a little bit of a deficit to see if I could lose that little bit of unwanted weight that I put on, my weight just shot up and I actually looked even worse, putting myself into a calorie deficit. And so that was a big warning sign for me. But in a way, to be honest, I didn't want to acknowledge it. Even though all the information I have, all the education I have, all the women I've helped through similar situations, when it's yourself and it's personal and you don't want to recognize that, it's very easy to completely just compartmentalize it and not even acknowledge what is going on. And so I put that side completely off, to where I was like, well, it doesn't really matter what's going on in my body right now. I don't need to look a certain way. It's okay to be a little bit softer. I can still run my business that way. Like everything's fine. I'm not going to deal with this right now. And so as time went on, I found myself feeling just more and more tired. So, as I mentioned before, like my daily schedule was me getting up at 5 a.m. That's when I had my first cup of coffee. Well, it seemed like every single month I was becoming more and more of a caffeine addict. And I just would have that first cup of coffee. And then, it used to be that by 10 a.m. I'd have my second cup. And now it's 8 a.m. and I need my second cup of coffee. And then now it's becoming, oh, I have a second cup at 8 a.m. and I have a third cup at 11 a.m. And then before I know it, I'm drinking, I'm not even counting the amount of caffeine, but later I looked back and I realized I was just on average drinking 600, 700 milligrams of caffeine, which as a 140-pound female was extremely unhealthy. And it felt like it was doing nothing for me. I would
Yeah.
drink the caffeine almost more as like a crutch because I was just felt so tired, and I was like, maybe this will help. But I just felt like the response was nominal. There was hardly anything there. So that's where I was drinking more and more of it, hoping that I could actually get a response.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a big red flag for me, that I knew something was off. But I just continued to ignore it and continued to ignore it. And it just, over the course of time, it got worse and worse. And I actually remember at that mastermind retreat that I was at with you guys, that was the one in Austin.
Yeah.
And I look back on that, and I remember that you guys might remember, like in the kitchen, there was a pot of coffee that people would kind of brew and go about their day. I'm pretty sure I drank an entire pot of coffee to myself that day because of us just sitting still in a room, listening to presentations and kind of talking to each other. I remember feeling so exhausted that I was drinking coffee all day long, and I still sometimes felt like it was hard to keep my eyes open during the presentations that were happening. And so it was actually, yeah, it was actually right after that trip that I came back, and I was just feeling terrible. I was starting to have a lot of digestive issues now. That was a big red flag for me. And, I won't go too into detail there because I don't think anybody wants to hear about that, but I was having some pretty extreme digestive issues. And that was the part that I couldn't ignore anymore.
Yeah.
Because
you were still eating the same way, right?
Yeah, actually, I was even cleaning things up even more and more and more because I was like, there must be something I'm eating right now that is triggering this. So I would, of course, I was really meticulous with my nutrition, and I tracked everything, and I was very aware of my food quality. But I was like, maybe I've developed some sort of intolerance to something. Let me remove the eggs, let me remove the spinach, let me remove, these fruits, it was just everything. I was just removing so many things and trying to check all the variables and giving myself an elimination diet, and nothing changed, nothing worked. And that was really the breaker for me.
How was your mood during this time too? Like, did you notice like mood swings, or were you still able to kind of manage yourself in that way?
That's a great question. I think if you asked my husband, he would probably
what's Omar
give a lot there. So it's, at the time, I don't think I realized it, but it was looking back that I realized that I was not myself. That's the only way I could describe it. I was absolutely not myself. I was more anxious than ever before. I was starting to have periodic just anxiety attacks, which I've had before. So it wasn't completely new to me, but every once in a while I would just completely break down, more emotional. And, I was like, Omar and I, we've always had a really incredible relationship, really great communication. We've never really fought very much, but I would say during that period of time was the most we've ever fought in our relationship. And it just felt like sometimes I just couldn't communicate well because my thoughts like weren't very clear. I often had what I would describe as brain fog, to where it just felt like I couldn't come up with the right words for something. It just felt like this like heaviness in my head that just nothing was very clearly coming out. Or, somebody would talk to me and I just felt like I couldn't even fully understand what they were saying at times. And it was the hardest thing because it made it even more challenging to verbalize and explain to people how I was feeling, because I just couldn't even come up with the thoughts very clearly to describe it at the time.
Yeah. As that progressed, was that all day, every day, or was it kind of like in and out as far as the symptoms that you're describing?
From my memory, I would say it was a little bit in and out, but there was never like a good day. Like it was pretty consistent. It's just the intensity, and like the intensity of which symptoms kind of varied. Like I might have a week where my digestion did calm down a little bit, and then I might think like, oh, things are working. And then the next week it's just as bad.
Yeah.
Or, maybe sometimes my brain fog was better than others, but I couldn't quite find any threads as to what was causing what.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make this point for anyone who's hearing this. So you have the stress, you have the thoughts, the emotions, the things that are coming up there, and then it starts to manifest as brain fog, as low energy, as more feelings of stress, because that's kind of exacerbating the problem, which is the business. And these two things are working in unison. There is the ultimate sign, which is the digestion, right? If your digestion starts to be off, then that's a really great indicator that there's something wrong internally. It's not normal to be either constipated or have really loose stools. So whatever camp you might fall into, those are two really great indicators that there's something going on internally. And then the last piece that you kind of alluded to, or not the last piece, but I put it out of sequence, was your body is not losing weight, right? You're noticing bloating, you're noticing that, hey, I am dieting at a point and I'm working out at a point that my body should be changing, but it's not. When those start to stack up, it's really important, as challenging as it is, to look at the facts, right? And not to ignore them so that you can start to change. And for you, what was the moment where you looked at the facts and you said, I need to change, or I need to start doing this differently? And how did you start doing that?
Yeah, so it was actually about that time of that I mentioned we come back from that retreat in Austin, and I remember just feeling absolutely terrible. And previously when we would have retreats or any kind of like event or something where I'm around other business owners and we're sharing ideas, like I always would come back more motivated and just like more clear than ever. And I typically could come back from those and like dive right into things and accomplish so much. And I just remember I came back from that retreat and I had so many ideas and so many things that I wanted to do. And yet that week after, I just felt like I could not execute on anything. I would maybe, sit down to work for the same amount of hours that I always have, but yet I would get hardly anything done because it just felt like my brain was processing things so slowly. And then I think it was later that week, I had a call with my the head coach now on my team. She wasn't at the time, but she's now our head coach and our head dietitian, Alex. And I was telling her about some of just kind of what I was feeling when just we were talking about how each other were doing. And I ended up actually sharing with her the digestive issues I had been dealing with. And it wasn't something I had really shared with other people, but at that point I had recognized, okay, this is a red flag, something is going on here. So I actually shared that with her, initially thinking, I think I need to get a GI map done. So a stool test, a more comprehensive stool test to see what is going on for those who aren't familiar with a GI map. And I was thinking there must be something going on just digestive wise that is causing this. And so she did go ahead and order the GI map, but she also suggested, what, I kind of feel like maybe there's some symptoms of cortisol imbalance going on here. Let's go ahead and at least just do a saliva cortisol test and check that out too. And so we went ahead and ordered both of those things, and essentially the Dutch test, or excuse me, the GI map came back, and there were definitely some major things going on there with my digestion as well. But the blaring thing was when the saliva cortisol test came back. My coach called me and she's like, "This is the worst cortisol test I have ever seen." And at this point, we work with a lot of women with these issues. It's something that we started to really carve out our own niche in. But at the time, she was like, "I have never seen one so flatlined before." So essentially, for those who don't know, when we're looking at your cortisol, your stress hormone, it's, of course, we talk about being a stress hormone, which kind of almost gives it a negative connotation, but like cortisol is a very necessary hormone in our body. We need it for a lot of different reasons. And one of those reasons is it's what wakes you up in the morning. It's what gives you energy naturally in the morning and kind of naturally tapers that off so you can go to sleep at night. So you should have a really beautiful natural curve across the day where it's highest in the morning and just slowly declines over the course of the day, then lowest at night when you would typically go to sleep. Well, mine was essentially just a straight line across the bottom from day to night, which was not healthy, not normal. And as a result, any hormone that's going to be off, you're going to have a host of other things that are going to end up becoming off because of that too. So that was the major thing that we saw right away from there. And so actually in that moment when she got those tests back, she was like, "So Vanessa, I think I want to go ahead and put you on my roster. You need to go ahead and I'm going to coach you. And I also am going to require that you step back from work a little bit." And she essentially kind of put me in my place of like, "You need to take a step back for the good of this business. We need to work on your health right now." And so that was about the end of April of 2022. So we officially started, I actually became a coach in my own program for the very first time at that point, or a client in my own program for the very first time at that point, working with one of my coaches, Alex, and put myself on her roster as a client. And we started working together in May and really went from there.
Wow. Yeah. How did that feel on your receiving end? Did you anticipate that that was going to be the case when you started traveling the route of getting the testing done, or were you surprised? And how did you take that feedback from Alex too? Because I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds like it's a gift, but I would imagine in the moment it was challenging.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely challenges, but there was also this almost feeling of relief
Mm,
when that I getting the essentially the results back when you kind of see everything in writing, it kind of gives you this feeling of like, oh, like I'm not crazy. This explains why I feel this way. Like when you have a reason to understand why you're feeling, there is an immense amount of relief that comes with that. I see that with our clients too. When we do a lot of ordering functional lab tests, and for a lot of people, they'll be struggling with all kinds of different strange symptoms. And when we can get functional labs back that you can't get from a doctor, or maybe you've got some basic work from your doctor and they just say, oh, everything's normal, you're good to go, but it doesn't explain why you're feeling the way you feel. And when we can look at things and say, even, oh, well, maybe this is technically normal according to the traditional medical system, but it's definitely not optimal. And because this isn't optimal, it's actually affecting this and this. And you can put the puzzle pieces together and say, well, this is why you feel this way. It's so relieving to be able
mm,
to understand that, and then to be able to have a plan of, and this is how we can fix this thing.
mm.
There's a way to feel better. So
Yeah.
in that way, it was extremely relieving. But I would say the other major like emotion that came up for me was definitely fear, because I was having a coach on my team directly tell me, you need to take a step back. Otherwise, like it's only going to get worse from here. And to be told you need to take a step back from your own business is really scary, because at this point in time, I had really grown this off of like my own sweat and tears. And of course, with the help of my incredible team that we built out at that point in time. But there was definitely a lot of limiting beliefs around, I mean, the business needs me to be able to keep growing and keep operating and keep being efficient. And if I am working less hours, then we're going to decline. We're not only are we going to stop growing, but we're going to shrink. Like we're going to have to let people go. We're going to lose clients. Like it's just going to get worse from here. And I was really fearful of that. And luckily I had some great business coaches that I was able to talk it through with. And that's where, shortly after that time period, I ended up actually, that same coach who became my own personal coach, Alex, she stepped up and we actually promoted her to head coach. She was able to really start to run our coaching team as a whole too.
That's awesome.
So you talk about stepping back from something that you felt like you needed to pursue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like I need to push the business forward, and I'm afraid that I have to step back from it. And I imagine the fear is that it won't grow, or that you won't hit the result, or there's going to be a failure that comes from it, or something of the like. How do you advise people to step back from their weight loss goal? Right, because that's a lot of times the
Yeah.
conflict is I'm wanting to, so you had, and this is a good thing, but you have kind of like a different experience. I think a lot of people who have to come to terms with the fact that they
That's
aren't
true.
healthy, right? A lot of times people, especially, I mean, it can be women and men. I've had a client who I've worked with for the last year who has had Hashimoto's, a pretty aggressive case, and we worked for the last year to build his metabolism, and now he's finally in a deficit and is doing great. So he's losing weight now, but I told him up at the front, I was like, you got to let go of this goal right now. But for a lot of people, that's really hard because it's the thing that they want to change the most. So from your perspective, how can that mindset of letting go of the current outcome to maybe get to the long-term outcome, how can that be balanced, or how do you approach that, or what are some helpful mindsets or approaches that help detach from the idea that you have to lose weight now so you can get healthy and in order to lose weight?
Yeah, I love this question because I can speak from my own personal experience that up until this point of me diving into my own hormone health journey, we've helped so many other women. I've personally coached so many other women through that same experience of like similar to like your client, of a woman who would come to me with a deep thyroid issue, to where we have to work on your health first before your body's going to allow you to lose weight. And it's really hard having those conversations with people, and I felt like I would be equipped to essentially have that own conversation with myself to be able to handle that. But yet when I found myself in that situation to where You know, at this point in time, as I was diving into now being coached by Alex, since I had really put this off for so long and I had slowly but surely been putting on a little bit of body fat, I had put on 10 pounds over the course of that prior year, just kind of slowly, a little bit month over month, to where it wasn't until that spring that I really was like, oh man, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. And when I tried to go in the deficit, it didn't work. It seemed to get worse. So then at this point, now where I was diving into my hormone health, I already was 10 pounds up from where I was comfortable at, where I wanted to be at. I was already a little bit uncomfortable in my body. So now Alex didn't have to have the conversation with me. I already knew at this point of, all right, we're diving into my health for probably the next year, looking at just where my cortisol is at. And, we did do a Dutch test there shortly after, and seeing that just other hormones, other sex hormones, were not where they should be either. Like, there was multiple issues going on. And just seeing all of this clearly told me that, all right, I'm going to have to spend probably a year here committed to just being at or above my maintenance calories, making sure that I'm feeding my body, nourishing my body, and supporting my body through this like restoration process, essentially. And yet, even knowing that, it was still really hard. And I talk about this with clients a lot. I was just having this conversation with a client yesterday who just came back on our team after she had worked with us initially and had really great experience. And then she just realized over the last year that she might have some hormone issues that she didn't realize during the time that, very similar to me, she was super driven, super hardworking. She never even acknowledged her own symptoms. She never even shared them with her coach because she just wrote them off as, oh, I'm tired all the time, but sure, because I'm, traveling so much for work, like that makes sense. Of course I would be tired. Or, oh man, I just don't feel very motivated. I'm struggling to recover from my workouts, but like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, work has been really stressful lately. So she never even voiced to her coach that, hey, I'm struggling to recover from my workouts. Hey, I'm really tired all the time. And she didn't realize it until, just this past spring. She hasn't been working with our team now for probably 9 months. And then she realized, you know what? My work has calmed down a lot lately. I'm no longer traveling for work very much. My routines are regular, and yet I'm still experiencing these symptoms I never even noticed. So I'm realizing now that there is something going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, going back to, of course, what I was saying there, I was having this conversation with her yesterday of, it's really, really hard because when I went through my journey, I dove into the protocols that Alex put me on starting in May of 2022. I felt worse before I felt better.
Mm.
And the reason for that is because a lot of the things that we have to do to fix these types of hormone issues and to really kind of bring everything back up and really help your body reset naturally, we have to take away a lot of the stuff that have been like your band-aids trying to keep yourself afloat. So like, I had to start to remove caffeine. And at this point, like I was saying, I was just drinking caffeine all day long, practically had an IV, just having it going all the time. And now I had to work on completely getting it down to zero. And I had been, working out really intensely 4 days a week. And for me, that was also just something that I would treat working out as a stress reliever. Oh, it's been a really stressful work day. I'm going to go push it hard in the gym right now. But now I need to remove exercise because my body needs to actually not be doing anything more than a gentle walk or very gentle yoga. Even too intensive yoga would completely set me backwards.
Mm.
So it's having to remove these things that I was using as like this kind of like external stimulus to help myself feel temporarily better, even if it was only for like an hour. Taking it away completely, I felt terrible for the next couple of months. And that was the hardest thing, was I actually had to dive deep into my own mindset and work myself through that. And there was a lot of work that had to be done.
Yeah. What did you shift your focus to? Because when you remove certain actions that are very seemingly rewarding, at least mentally, you have to replace it with something else. Or you kind of stew in that and it makes it much harder to process that stress. So what did you replace it with, and what were some of the things that helped you make that transition in lieu of taking a lot of those things away?
Yeah, so I dove into doing a lot of yin yoga. I mean, yin was the most I could do. I couldn't even do vinyasa without just, sometimes I'd feel physically sick for a couple of days if I pushed myself too hard. I was doing just a lot of journaling. I started allowing myself to sleep in for the first time in my life. I was somebody that, like, starting in middle school, my dad taught me that the best time to be at the gym was 5 a.m. And, pretty much all through, high school and college, I was a college athlete with 6 a.m. workouts. Like, for my whole life, I always just have known, like, you wake up early and you start getting stuff done early, whether that's the gym or work or something. You're productive early in the morning if you want to be successful. And for the first time in my life, I took away my alarm and I allowed myself just to sleep in. I would still go to bed early, but I allowed myself to actually sleep as much as my body told me I needed to sleep. Sometimes it would still take a nap in the afternoon, even after that.
Yeah.
And I really just focused on as much restorative behaviors as possible. So allowing myself to be, around people that were more restorative for me, like spending more time with family. This, of course, looking back to, of like, this was the summertime. So there was the added difficulty of, like, I live in Florida and my family likes to be out in the boat and do stuff like that. And there's like the mental challenge of, I'm putting on weight here. I'm already 10 pounds heavier than I want to be, but I'm also, like, adding a little bit of body fat right now because that's what my body needs to be able to start to feel a little bit safer right now, to be able to let my sex hormones get to a good balance. And mentally, that was a little bit uncomfortable. So I spent a lot of time, diving deep into just different mindset types of activities and work that I've done with clients in the past but hadn't done myself for years. And just really focusing on growing myself as a human, as a person during this time, and not, thinking, well, am I working out harder? Am I lifting heavier? Am I, how's the business growing? Like, I'm really just focusing on how am I feeling right now, and, like, measuring those types of things month over month with some specific metrics around there, and just really focusing on that. And I mean, funny enough, the business grew tremendously over that time too, as a result of it. So sometimes it's like you loosen your grip on something a little bit. And I do believe that everything happens the way it's supposed to. And me, sharing my story at the time, and it ended up attracting a lot of other women who were essentially raising their hand, being like, oh my gosh, I feel this way too. And so, it was kind of fun. We brought in a lot of clients at the time that were very similar stories to me. We were able to help them at the same time as I was helping myself. And, it ended up being a great thing, but it was definitely not without a lot of challenges.
Yeah. And for those of you who are listening to that, before we move on from Vanessa's great answer there, one of the, I'll say, tools or tactics perhaps that allow you to change your focus is giving them meaning. So for what you said there was, you took these activities that in the past were kind of more defined as things that not necessarily that lazy people do, but just like things that were too easy. We'll just say it that way, right? You took those activities and you gave them a name. You said, I focused my attention on restorative activities, and that gives them purpose. It gives them meaning. You measured them the same way you would for hard-hitting goals or challenging activities, and you took them and you made them their own bucket. And that's what she did that really helped her to embrace that season of her health and what her body actually needed. Would you say that's fairly accurate, Vanessa?
Yeah, that was a great way to sum that up, Lindsay.
Love it. What were you going to ask?
I think that the next piece to tie this down and really give more practical pieces of advice would be to kind of illustrate where you are right now. So what has changed? What does the other side of this look like for someone who might be in that space, and it really comes, you put the right habits in place, right? It's a matter of sleeping more, of changing the way you're moving your body. Obviously there might be supplementation, things that you did in that regard that continue to reinforce the changes, but it was a practice of you restoring your body. And where are you at right now? What has changed for you?
Yeah, so there was a lot that's happened throughout probably a 6-month period there of just both removing things and adding things in. So, like you were saying, adding in a lot of the restorative things, of course, like adding in certain, just certain foods, adding in more to naturally help support things, but also, of course, adding in some supplementation as well, really feeding my body up, taking care of my body, really focusing on that restorative stuff. And then come the fall, I was able to kind of slowly start adding in things. So at this point in time, we had done another Dutch test. So where this is another type of functional lab test where you can see some really comprehensive hormone analysis, really see like what's usable. And so at this point in time, I was able to kind of look at my cortisol a little bit more in depth on the Dutch test, as well as see how my sex hormones had evolved from the first time taking a look at them. And at this point, things had improved immensely. So of course, it's like super rewarding when you get to that point. You're like, all right, the work that I put in these last few months, it's been hard, but I can see now clearly, there's no denying it. I can see that we're on the up and up. So even if I don't consistently feel better every single day, because there is sometimes that mental battle of like, I think I'm feeling better, but then sometimes I still feel terrible. And I'm like, maybe this is all for nothing. Maybe it's not getting better. But once you can see it in writing of, all right, things are improving, then it's super motivating to where it's like full speed ahead now of like, all right, now this is almost my new hobby of I just want to keep improving these numbers. And so in the fall, I was able to finally kind of get cleared to start adding back in some strength training. And we started with just 2 days of strength training. And it was really a hard ego hit. It was really tough going from somebody who's always pushed myself and loved to work out really hard to now I have to take it super easy. Really can't push myself, have to keep my RPE really low. Just starting with 2 days and kind of seeing how well did I recover from there. And so from there, like we're still, this whole time, really all through the end of 2022 and early 2023, still continuing to eat at or above maintenance to make sure I'm at least always nourishing my body really, really well. Because at this point, like when your adrenals have been super taxed, they need a lot more just certain vitamins and minerals than you would normally need. So like my body was just like eating it up. And so I just needed a lot of nutrients to support my body. And so then finally come the beginning of 2023, I was able to see from at that point, my kind of last Dutch test through that journey and see that at that point, everything was almost like perfectly optimal where it needed to be, which was for me like the greatest moment of realizing like, wow, this has been a really hard about 9 months now at this point, but it's all been worth it because I can now see clearly that everything has improved tremendously. And at this point, I think I had mentioned early on that we had initially done a GI map and there were some things off there. I had done another GI map and there were still some things I wanted to improve. So that's where it's like, that was a 9-month journey of me really focusing hard on my hormone health, but there were other things that still needed improvement at that point at the beginning of 2023. So I focused on that a little bit more this past season. And now really this spring, things have been in a great spot to where I'm actually now back it finally into a calorie deficit. And my body is responding. And the amazing thing is I still feel great. Like I have so much energy and I'm drinking 0 caffeine. I have a cup of mud water, which is basically just some like adaptogens and some tea. And then occasionally I have a cup of matcha tea, but that's really maybe 60 milligrams of caffeine max per day. And I have so much energy. I wake up naturally early most mornings, but even if I do set my alarm to wake myself up early, I don't feel like I need to keep sleeping for hours on end. I just have so much more like clarity of thought again, to where I don't feel as frustrated trying to work because I feel like I can actually be efficient. I can get more done in less time, which leaves me space to now focus on other areas of my life. So I've been able to dive deeper into cultivating friendships and, spend more time with family. I have a little niece and a nephew who are only about a year old and about 4 years old, and they're growing so fast. And it's so fun to be around them as much as possible because it seems like if I, don't see them for a week, by the next week, they've grown so much. So it's be able to spend time with them and have the energy to play tag and chase them around and do things without feeling run down from it is just worth everything I went through.
That's awesome.
So I would say that's kind of where I'm at now, is just feeling like everything's in such a better spot. And there's always going to be more things to optimize and improve as different challenges come. But I would say overall in a really healthy place now.
Yeah. What was the lesson that you needed that you didn't realize was being thrust upon you now looking back?
Gosh, there were so many lessons, but I think the greatest one that I learned really over the last year is how you feel is always going to be a product of how you think. And so it's like really kind of coming full circle of what we talked about in the beginning of it wasn't just the things I was doing that created this response. It was how I was thinking about the things that I was doing. And so nowadays I am working a lot right now, to be honest. I'm not working as many hours as I was before, and I'm more protective of my weekends, and I'm better at setting boundaries. But I am pushing pretty hard right now in our work. We're definitely in a growing season, and that's not without me taking a lot of calls, or sometimes working a little bit later into the evening than would be ideal in long term, when eventually we want to start a family and not be working all the time. But it's my mindset around it is so different now, to where I can push myself during times, and I can completely acknowledge of everything I do is my choice. And if I choose to push myself, then that's great. I'm choosing to push myself, and I know why I'm choosing to do that. And if I like the reason why I'm choosing to do that, then I have no reason to have any feelings of guilt or shame, or like I'm doing something wrong or anything. And it just changes how I feel, and it changes the physiological responses in my body.
Love
That's
that.
great.
And to tie down this, as we're coming to time, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's in that same spot where this resonates, they're dealing with something similar, they're starting to notice this in their body, or if they're right where you were, what piece of advice would you give them? Or pieces, for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, the a most important one is just to not ignore the symptoms of how you're feeling. Don't make excuses for how you feel, and just say, well, it's okay, because all the entrepreneurs feel this way. Everybody's tired. Everybody complains about being tired all the time. Everybody talks about being stressed. It's normal. Don't write these things off. Or maybe you're a parent and you're like, well, of course I'm going to be just struggling with all these things. I have these young kids running around. How could I not? It's so easy to write things off and make excuses. But if you have even the slightest little feeling in your gut that something could be wrong, maybe some of the symptoms that I've shared resonated with you, or maybe there's just been others that you've seen elsewhere that you kind of feel like, oh, it kind of sounds like me. Maybe I'm struggling to lose weight. Maybe I do feel like I just need naps. Maybe I really relying on caffeine, whatever it is. Just at least start by going to your doctor and getting basic blood work, because most people have some sort of health insurance that can cover some basic blood work, and that can at least be a good place to start. And then you take that blood work to a professional who will actually look at the optimal ranges, because there are some really great doctors out there who will look beyond what is normal. But most of the time, when you're going to a doctor and they're looking at your labs, they're really comparing you to an unhealthy population. And so you might be within a normal range, but it might not mean that it's optimal, which might mean that there's still a lot of things that you could improve by really basic changes that are still practical for your lifestyle. You don't have to do what I did. You don't have to, cancel your alarm and completely give up working out and completely do just yoga and all these Zen things that are really possible for somebody who doesn't have kids right now and is an entrepreneur, works for themselves. It's easy for me to say those things, but there are things that you, even as the busiest person who maybe has kids, maybe goes to work somewhere, there are still little things that you can do that could make a huge difference in how you feel. And it's you just have to start by finding out what is actually going on with yourself before you can even know what changes you need to make.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. So helpful.
That was beautiful. The whole span of your story, I think, is a really great example for a lot of people. So that's really great. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me.
Of course. And we'll end with a couple quick fire real quick, especially because I feel like these answers will be so different than they would have been when we saw you last. What is one book that has changed your life more than any other?
Oh, this one will always be the same, and it's The Obstacle is the Way. That was the first really mindset type of book I read as a freshman in college, and I think I've referred back to that so many different periods in my life, because even during different times of my life, it's had different meaning for me.
I love that. Ryan Holiday. I have a full section on my bookcase of all of it. What is your idea of paradise? Your 10 out of 10 perfect day?
Oh, is this in a normal day, or
you can have whatever you want. It's your fantasy.
Well, you say paradise, and I'm imagining myself on the beach in probably, I would even say Mexico, but if we're going to really go there, I would say probably the coast of Spain, with my husband, and just, being honestly off the grid. As much as I love my career, that I do love the times when I can completely check out of social media and not be on any technology, not any stimulus, and just be with a good book and great conversation and great food. That would be paradise.
That's very nice. And what is one habit that you need in your day in order to conquer it as of late?
I need to go for a walk outside every single day because it's for me, I love the outdoors, and I live in Florida where luckily we have sunshine most of the time, and it's like on the days that I just for whatever reason either don't go for my morning walk or to like put off going outside, I feel like a different person. So I definitely need that no matter where I am, what I'm doing, I need to make sure I go for like a nice peaceful walk outside.
Love
Love
that.
that. Awesome.
Where can people connect with you or learn more about your coaching?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on Instagram at Vanessa G Fitness. I've put out tons of freebies and different things there. So of course, if there's anything that resonates with you, you can always hit me up there. Love to chat with people. And then I also have a podcast as well called the Vanessa G Fitcast. So you can check that out too on pretty much all your places you get podcasts.
Amazing.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. Again, you're the best. I'm so glad that we got to do this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad I was able to get on here with you guys. This was super, super fun.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening, we hope that you have gotten so much from this podcast. Send it to somebody who needs it, or take these pieces of advice and apply them to your own life so that you can go out and conquer your day.